From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And from the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
And you're about to enter
the DMZ. That worked well,
classic
Bill.
Intro.
What do you think of that, people?
I like that.
Yeah, it's sort of an homage to the old show, The Weekend Live.
You know, someday Bill O'Reilly's not going to be around, and you're going to have to enter something.
That is right. You're about to enter the no-spin zone.
We are, as we tape this, we are 2 days from sequester, which everyone assumes is going to happen at least for a time. And it seems like both sides think they're winning.
That is sort of what we get. But as you know, Republicans have often thought they were going to win. So I'm a little skeptical of Happy Talk, but maybe this time is different. I think there are some differences here.
Well, I mean, one difference is that, with the fiscal cliff, your taxes go up immediately. You will feel the pain of the fiscal cliff right away. You don't want to get blamed for that. With the debt ceiling, you're going to cause a global economic catastrophe immediately. You don't want to get blamed for that. Sequester, when you're cutting government spending in various accounts, that even though all these cuts happen, abruptly from a government bureaucratic standpoint, if you're in the government bureaucracy, you understand the immediate impact. How that affects the customer, the voter immediately, that's a little more murky. Obviously, the president's out there saying that there are going to be some immediate impacts. The Republicans are saying that's not really true. And you could move the money around in a way that it wouldn't be, that would be even less true.
Right.
So there is some debate over how tough people are going to feel it. And at least on the Republican side, they're willing to see how it goes.
Right. Well, I think that there's some fear fatigue. I mean, you can only be frightened so many times that the world is going to end. And I think the public has, it's harder to scare them. After so many times of warning that they're nearing the abyss. And I do think that Obama, at least rhetorically, is engaged in what's come to be known as the fireman first Washington Monument strategy, whereby the first thing you cut, it's not bureaucracy, it's not waste, it's not fat. The first thing you cut, if you're a Democrat, are things that the public wants. But as the Washington, D.C. Examiner recently pointed out, they can't threaten to close the Washington Monument because it's been closed already since, an earthquake or something hit D.C. a few years ago.
Right. But there's still lots of talk about national parks being closed or hours greatly reduced. And there's all sorts of people, all sorts of middle-class people that go to national parks for their vacations because that's a cheap vacation. And if they're denied that's a way that things could be felt relatively quickly. Because you might have the symbolic Washington Monument to point to, but there's still lots of other things out there that could affect regular folks.
And the other interesting thing, Bill, is how will it affect the Washington, D.C. area? I mean, where I'm sitting now is one of the areas that has really done quite well in spite of the recession, by and large. Right. Housing prices continue to rise. Big government is very good for this region of the country. And but this could be hit pretty hard by this sequester. So, that'll have an interesting local angle, I think, as well. The thing that Republicans...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the thing that Republicans... have to sort of, the way that Republicans could win, and I'm always dubious about the notion that Republicans will win these sorts of showdowns because they never do for a variety of reasons. But the thing that should, if Democrats warn of a coming apocalypse and then nothing happens, it will be a Y2K type situation. And then I think going forward, Republicans can point to, remember when they said if we cut a little bit of spending that the world would end? It didn't. So this, that's how Republicans could win, I think, is maybe by establishing precedent and using this as an example.
Right. and we don't have quite a precedent of this. We have a precedent of government shutdown, how people reacted to that, and people did not like that. And I think Dick Armey said the last time there was a prospect of a shutdown, and Republicans thought this would prove people to prove that people don't really care when government goes away because it doesn't really affect them, and the opposite ended up being true. And Dick Armey said, look, when government services get shut down, Republicans can't shift that blame away because everybody knows Republicans wants to shrink government. So when it gets shrunk, and if people don't like it, everyone knows what Republicans want. So a blame shifting strategy doesn't work. There is
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who is to blame. Republicans will be blamed because their brand is that they want less government and they want to cut spending. So if anything goes wrong, they're much more likely to be blamed. Not to mention the fact that the press and the president is the bully pulpit as well as willing accomplices in the press. But even it's
also very similar to when it's the same kind of nuanced obstacle that the left has when they want to expand government. If you want to expand government, you have to do it right. If you expand government and you do it in a ham-handed way, you do it in a half-assed way, you don't think through the consequences, that's going to sully your entire philosophical direction in the eyes of the public. There may be lots of smart ways to reduce the size of government, make it more efficient, but if you bet your chips on the most crude way, the most abrupt way, and it doesn't work out, then you're sullying your brand.
And I think this speaks possibly to the epistemic closure where, if you're a conservative, then the notion of, all right, screw it, man, we're shutting it down, is popular and gets a big applause line. But to the average person out there, it may seem, radical and imprudent. And there may be a better way to communicate the message that we need to cut government. But I am very sympathetic to the notion that, I'll be honest with you, Bill, I'm in the camp that says we should let this sequester happen. Because it's really, even though we're talking about billions of dollars, it is a minuscule percentage of the overall budget, really a reduction in the increase of the budget. And clearly we don't have the political will to compromise and to do a more surgical, cut. And if we can't do this, then we can't do anything. So all we have to do is nothing, and this will happen. So
well, but the trick there is that it may be that the dollar figure is a small percentage relative to the size of the budget, but depending on where that axe falls, it may have a disproportionate impact in the area that people might care about, whether it's the military, whether it's social services.
Yeah. I would much rather see real entitlement reform. That's where the money is, in entitlements. And I'd much rather see real entitlement reform, real tax reform. But clearly, that's not going to happen. Not anytime soon.
That's where Republicans are going now, because there's as the old Iraqi saying is, when you're surrounded by death, you'll accept defeater. Republicans need to be so demoralized that they can't get cuts anywhere. They're willing to turn their backs on the military. The military cuts were the last thing the Republicans ever wanted, but now they seem to be saying, if that's where we can get cuts, fine, we'll take it, as long as we can cut something.
Well, it is interesting, Bill, and I wrote something yesterday about, did Obama's reelection really break the will of the Republican Party? And you think about it, willing to raise taxes, although technically they didn't raise taxes, they did. Willing to cut the military. You've got governors like Christie and Scott down in Florida willing to accept the Medicaid expansion. You have governors like Bob McDonnell in Virginia raising taxes to pay for a new transportation bill. You have McCain and Graham meeting with Obama about immigration reform. A lot of stuff happening that you might not have expected, especially if Obama had lost the re-election. And from people like Bob McDonnell and look at Rick Scott. I mean, he really
Rick Scott started his entire political career, taking his healthcare executive profits, creating conservatives for patients' rights, so he would be the sole face of the anti-Obamacare movement.
No, you're right, Bill. I was actually maybe the first. I may have been the first national journalist to write about that at Politics Daily, about his campaign. Certainly one of the first. Well, way before he ran for governor. So I think that, as much as we talk about politicians, politics as usual and politicians not changing, I mean, just look at the last couple of days, some of the things that have happened with Republicans really changing their tune on things. Something is afoot.
But I mean, some of these things I feel like with the Obamacare Medicaid stuff, I understand a governor saying, "Look, it's the law of the land. I'm getting free money. It's not. I'm not increasing my budget deficit doing this. Let's put aside the emotion of the argument, just accept the facts as they are." That to me is more of just a reality check. But
a reality check is maybe a change, though, in and of itself.
Well, I think Rick Scott can make that decision. Chris can make that decision and not say, this means I like Obamacare. This means I've changed my view about the role of government in healthcare. It just is, this is the law. I lost this argument. Therefore, I'm not going to, do something. I'm not going to do something stupid on top of stupidity and deny people in my state funds that I get for free. I think it's different than, say, the fiscal cliff deal or what's happening now with the Republican attitude towards military spending, which is really just, I feel, abandoning 30 years of Republican dogma. Small government, low taxes, strong military. That's like the slogan. That's the bumper sticker that's in the glue of the party. And now they have voted for higher taxes, and they're on the verge of look, they voted for the sequester in 2011. Let's not forget. So they voted for the law that created the sequester and are now allowing it to be executed over a giant cut on the military, something they said they would never, ever, ever allow to happen. That, to me, is a huge, huge deal. Some of the other stuff I think is notable. I don't think it's as big as that.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny, this ties into a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about later in the show. It's very interrelated. That's not always the case on the show, but I think today it certainly is. I think it does speak to the fact that things have changed, the world has changed, and conservatism in the Republican Party is going to have to adapt. And I think it also, right or wrong, speaks to the dominant issue on the right is cutting spending and fixing the debt. That is the most important issue right now, it seems to me, and such an important issue that Republicans take it so seriously that they're willing to go after some of their own, kill their own darlings, go after some sacred cows.
Now, maybe they think that, they're playing three-dimensional chess and they're playing games until Obama cracks and those cuts will be restored, so therefore they're not really abrogating their principles there. And I know that on the left, after the fiscal cliff deal, there were people who were not happy with it, felt that Obama was allowing more hostage-taking pressure points to be put on the calendar. You push back sequester to March 1st, they'll take the economy hostage then. The continuing resolution ends on March 27th, and if you don't extend that, you have a government shutdown. Another hostage-taking point then, extending the debt ceiling for a few more months, and you got one more coming up in May. So they felt like Obama was just setting himself up for more compromise, more concession, time and time again. But I feel what we're seeing now is Republicans show they were unwilling to let the debt ceiling be breached by extending it a few months ago. They don't want the blame for that. They seem to be willing to take a chance on sequester. And like we said, I think the chance of sequester having an immediate infliction of pain on regular people arguably is less so than the others. But when government shutdown occurs on the 27th, I would think it's very probable that that might be the point where Republicans flinch again. Because Boehner didn't want to have a government shutdown. They've never wanted to have a government shutdown. They've had opportunities to force one before, and they've always walked away from that. They walked away from a government shutdown. They've walked away from debt ceiling. They've walked away from fiscal cliff. Sequester is a different story, But if they're only willing to push it that far for a couple of weeks, it may be that they might be willing to take on the extra baggage of government shutdown 3 weeks from now, and Obama will then be in the catbird seat. I think it's likely that the way Obama has allowed the calendar to be structured is going to work out in his favor, not because the dynamics are the same. Obama can take political heat, even if he wasn't to get some blame. He hasn't run for re-election again. He can take on more heat. He can take on more water on this. Some of the Republicans can, who are already in the dumps, already below 20% in the polls, and have to run for re-election in 2 years.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, name a time when Republicans have gone up against Obama and won the PR battle. I mean, now some of this maybe is unique to Obama. You know, someone this morning on Morning Joe said, like, what if Dennis Kucinich were trying to sell these same principles? It just wouldn't work. I mean, there's something special about Obama. Plus, he has the bully pulpit. So, and then I think there are these built-in skews that the public knows that Republicans don't like big government and want to cut government, and so if something goes wrong in the process of doing that, they will be blamed fairly or unfairly. So I don't disagree with that, though.
So what would you do? I mean, what I used to recommend in the Bush years, when Bush won re-election, I would argue, look, let this stuff happen. You don't have to get all tangled up in the compromising and getting your hands sullied with conservative ideology. So long as it doesn't cause permanent, if something's going to cause permanent damage like Social Security privatization, filibuster that. Otherwise, let the stuff go, let the hammer fall. Don't vote for it. You set yourself apart from it, but let it go, and then argue it out 2 years later, and have the faith that your argument can win the day once people see the effects. That doesn't seem to be the Republican attitude about this. They seem a little caught up with being part of the scrum, and not just walking away and letting the chips fall.
I think you're totally right. I'm reminded of, Governor Koch, who just passed away. His famous line, the public, he said, the public has spoken. What was the quote? Do you remember, Bill? It wasn't the public has spoken to bastards. It was something like, I could look it up.
It was Mo Udall.
What's that?
I think Mo Udall said the people have spoken, the bastards.
So that was Mo Udall. I'll see if I can find it here on my phone. But essentially it was like they can, they'll reap what they sow. Somebody will correct me in the comments. I have no doubt about it, just as they corrected my Yeats poem last week. But essentially what Koch basically said was, bad things are going to happen, and they deserve it because they didn't vote for it. And I think that's sort of there's something to be said for that. I mean, my take, Bill, is that conservatism doesn't work until all other options have been exhausted. And if you look at Reagan's rise, you had big cities like New York, crime was running amok. You had hostages taken in Iran. You had stagflation. The country was falling apart. And they finally were willing to turn to Reagan, I think reluctantly. And, conservatives don't like the term reactionary, but, I do think that in many ways, like, conservatism has only ever really tried after liberalism really fails. And that hasn't happened. And it's not going to happen if conservatives prevent it from actually from actually being tried, or if they minimize the damages of it. I do think that for a long time we were living under the age of Reagan, and I think that Bill Clinton is Republicans didn't like Bill Clinton, and they were frustrated with him mainly because he was co-opting their ideas. And he was winning as a Democrat, all sort of stealing Republican ideas in many ways. And I think that now finally Obama has gotten past that. So we are in a different era, a more liberal era. But I don't think that enough time has passed and enough of Obama's ideas have been implemented that they will fail and that there'll be a backlash. Now, there are a couple problems with letting things fail. One is things could go well, and it could just go well in spite of liberal policies, not necessarily because of them. Or you could also argue that you do get to that tipping point where if liberalism, reaches at some point, there will be a tipping point where the public would be sucking at government teat. What Mitt Romney worried about with the 47% or whatever. But having said that, I really do believe that conservatives, I think you make a good point. There's a time when you punt the ball, Bill. You punt and you sort of back off and you play a prevent defense for a while. You retreat. It doesn't mean that you're giving up. It means that you're kind of regrouping. But Republicans haven't done that. They're constantly in the fight. Every little thing they're fighting, every little skirmish, they leave no shot unanswered. And there's something admirable about that. But from a solely strategic standpoint, you have to wonder if it's worked out.
Now, you mentioned before that there are a number of areas where you're seeing Republicans back down in various areas. And just yesterday, we saw Republicans back down on the Chuck Hagel nomination. So they had an initial filibuster a week and a half ago. They take a break, they come back, they vote for it. They say, we've had enough time to have our questions answered. I'm not really clear what questions they got answered. I know the White House gave them a few documents here and there, but I don't really see it. Nothing really got made of those documents. They didn't voice some new round of scandal talk from those documents. And what struck me about that kabuki dance was when the filibuster vote first occurred, there was a lot of commentary, at least on my Twitter feed, from some prominent folks on the left who were mad at Harry Reid for not going nuclear on the filibuster reform question, not saying at the start of the new Senate session, we can change the rules with a simple majority vote, not the traditional two-thirds vote. And if the parliamentarian rules otherwise, we can overrule the parliamentarian and screw you, which would set a new precedent of some majority rules changes, which would have a lot of repercussions. So he didn't want to do that. Reid said openly after he cut a smaller deal with McConnell that he didn't want to walk away from a 60-vote threshold for major issues. He didn't want to have the so-called talking filibuster be required for all filibusters, but he did other things that were designed to speed the nominations process, at least for a period of time. And I believe it had the force of a gentleman's agreement. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. I don't think they actually passed something. I think it was more a handshake kind of deal. And folks on the left said that was a big cave-in on Reid's part. And then when the Hagel filibuster vote occurred, you saw lots of, good thing Harry Reid got filibuster reform passed. Oh, right, ha, 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 that kind of thing. And now that the filibuster got broken fairly effortlessly, it was a pretty minor hiccup in the big scheme of things. I'm not seeing folks say, oh, maybe Harry Reid played that one right. Maybe Harry Reid, didn't totally alienate the Republicans. Didn't have to throw out the supermajority requirement on rules changes, which can benefit the minority in the future when you become in the minority. And so far, we're not seeing absolute wall-to-wall obstruction of big nominations. May be something happening in the future that would force a reconsideration of what I'm saying right now. But at minimum, you would think some of these folks would say, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Maybe Republicans are actually being more compliant than I thought they ever could be, seeing what we've seen in the past several years. And no one's crediting the fact that Reid's approach to the Republicans, which has always been pretty nuanced, perhaps is reaping some benefit.
Well, let me first say, Bill, that I found the quote from Ed Koch. It's, the people have spoken and they must be punished. So I think he was asked, will you try to win back your seat or something like that? And he said, no, the people. So, Republicans could adopt that attitude. On the other side of the coin comes fighting. And as you were just talking about the Hagel nomination, and Republicans obviously fought, and there was all sorts of hand-wringing. And Conor Friedersdorfer at The Atlantic has a funny Well, I think it's kind of funny. But, an interesting column today where he recounts some of the things that conservatives said about Hagel, like mainly predictions that he wouldn't be confirmed. So it's fun to sort of look back at some of the things that were said that obviously didn't come true. But there is an argument for fighting. Like, let's suppose that that Republicans just said, okay, well, look, I don't like Chuck Hagel. I wouldn't nominate him if I were president. And if Mitt Romney had won and he had nominated Chuck Hagel, I would freak out. But, Chuck, it's Barack Obama. And, I mean, is Chuck Hagel worse than John Kerry, the guy that we, said, the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, wasn't whatever they said about him. And John Kerry managed to get, confirmed like very quickly. So
he got slobbered all over. It was probably a unanimous vote.
Yeah, but apparently, I don't remember what the charges of the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth were precisely, but if they were disqualifying for president, presumably they would have been disqualifying now for Secretary of State. But in any event,
state's kind of a hippie position, so it's a different standard.
That's true. There's no doubt that president is more important. So my point, though, is if Republicans sort of took this rational approach and said, look, the president gets his guy, he's not our guy, but what the hell? I mean, Obama could certainly do worse than a Vietnam veteran who used to be a Republican senator. If they're not fighting over that, then that gives Obama more time to do more liberal stuff. And it gives the press more time to cover more stuff. So, I guess there's an argument for dragging your feet and for just for the sake of raising a stink, even if at the end of the day you end up confirming the guy weeks later. And maybe in the process, you get people on your side worked up, you build email lists of activists and supporters. I suppose that there's a strategic purpose in waging these sort of political wars, even if at the end of the day you end up kind of knuckling under and confirming the guy anyway.
I see that logic more with the budget stuff. The extent that we're having budget debates every few months, that is kind of a grinding process that soaks up time and energy into other bigger reform battles. And you're seeing the White House trying not to get trapped in that muck. They're trying to keep pushing on immigration and gun violence prevention at the same time. And even though last week I made a glib comment that Obama wasn't talking about jobs, he did put an infrastructure plan on the table last week too. So they're trying to keep the ball moving on these various fronts. And we still also have climate on the back burner too, and what he might do with EPA regulations. That's still lurking out there. And those are all things, with the exception of the infrastructure piece, that he can do without spending more money. So he can go on dual tracks. The budget process doesn't deny him the ability to do those other things. But it still takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of space. And if Republicans wanted to play for time in that respect, I could see the logic in that, although I think they still suffer politically in the process.
It's sort of like the political equivalent of, if you're playing against Tom Brady, you want to hit him. Maybe you don't sack him, but and maybe you don't win the game, but you want to sort of, there should be a price to be paid for running a play. And if you batter the offensive line and the quarterback enough in the first half, and it gets a little bit muddy, then maybe you can sort of win at the end of the game. And that's sort of, I think that's sort of the analogy for why you would fight every little skirmish and every little battle, as opposed to just sort of backing off and regrouping and playing Bob Michael, so to speak.
I certainly see that strain of thinking in the party, but I also see, I still think the party is quite in sync with what their strategy is. McCain and Graham, who led the Hagel fight, they were the people who their faces were on the battle to stop the nomination. And then they were the ones that walked it back. When other folks in their party still were kind of geared up to see it to the bitter end, they're the ones that went out of the way to say, we got the questions answered, let's not hold us up any longer. I mean, as much as the left is really irritated by McCain and Graham, especially McCain, because he seems so petty and bitter since 2008, he's a great enemy to have if he's always going to walk it back at the end of the day. So if he's going to be the person who's going to wave the flag and then bring it down, that's fantastic. And then the day after he does, or the same day he does that, he goes into the White House with Graham and praises Obama to the skies about his immigration approach. So again, he could have worse enemies.
Right.
So there seems to be there's a flank of the party that wants to restore the Republican brand by seeing constructive partners in governance, and there's the Tea Party part that wants to, make the hit wherever they can make the hit, and we'll worry about the consequences later. Let's just try to do what we can to slow things down, and it doesn't quite seem to come together with as a cohesive and coherent strategy what to do, which is in Obama's interest because he wants to pick off people to try to get to a majority vote all the time.
The conservative movement is. It has an identity crisis, Bill, as you know, as we've long documented. And I think that, in a way, it sort of has to get worse before it gets better. You have to sort of hit rock bottom like a drunk, as I've said before. And I think that's we're still in the process of doing that. But, I mean, you look, taxes were the thing that, now they've, raised taxes. And Bob McDonnell, the governor of Virginia, just raised taxes. Sales taxes, home taxes, a car tax. But then there's the social issues. Well, we've got this big thing with CPAC right now. Seems like consensus is that most conservatives I see, at least online, think that CPAC should let Go Proud, this gay conservative group, co-sponsor, despite the fact that a lot of social conservative groups apparently don't want that.
And just so folks know, the military CPAC is the big annual conservative convention, 10,000 strong every year, always generates a lot of attention, and is sort of, where the public and the media sort of temperature gauge, where the conservative movement is at, every spring.
Yeah, and now the big controversy lately is, should Chris Christie have been invited? But I think that all of these things serve as a way of sort of illustrating the fact that conservatism needs to do some soul searching, and there needs to be a leader, which has been an absence of leadership, and there needs to be a consensus of what conservatives believe in, because the Soviet Union for a long time was the glue that held that together, and I think the assumption or the hope was that the global war on terror would replace that as the glue that held these disparate strains of conservatism together. It really hasn't worked out. And then the influx of new people into the movement who don't have a sort of tradition in a Burkean sense of conservatism complicate things. So right now, I mean, depending on who you ask, conservatism could either be for a strong national defense or for cutting defense spending. Conservatism could be believing in strong family values and traditional cultural values, or welcoming anybody into the party who's going to defend freedom and liberty against Barack Obama and tyranny. I mean, it really is I hate to say, I mean, it's unclear what conservative means today, other than hating Obama. And I think that that maybe that'll be sorted out if there is a strong Republican nominee for president next time around. But it's a very weird place to be right now, and I think that everything, including all the controversy around CPAC, illustrates that point.
Well, I don't think it's historically unusual in that, look, when Bush was in office, the left was pretty united around hating Bush, and what differences there were amongst the broad spectrum of the left were papered over until Obama came into office, and now some of that stuff got pushed back up to the surface again. It didn't get pushed up to the surface so badly that it caused deep rifts that prevented Obama from getting stuff done and getting reelected, but they're there.
No, but I agree, Bill. I mean, we do have to be cognizant that the other side has troubles too. But I think that what's happening to conservatism right now is different, and is I mean, every time a party's out of power or loses or spends a little time in the wilderness, they have to regroup and rethink.
I think you're at a place now that's more analogous to Democrats in '84 as opposed to Democrats in 2004, or '88. Well, more '84. '88 was when Democrats really got flat in their back. So I'm very sad.
I think that's true, Bill, and I would say that, as I stated earlier, I think that the Clinton presidency really wasn't the answer either. It took them until 2008, I think, to really get the groove back in terms of liberalism.
But as I wrote in that piece for the Daily Caller, which you helped me get published there, I thought, I actually
tried to get you blocked, Bill. I actually tried to stop that piece from being. I want to be very clear. I tried to stop them from publishing it. I couldn't.
I think it was necessary for people to take, for the left, to take the Clinton medicine and to jettison some of the social issues that were holding the left back. I say this not gleefully, but just as an objective perspective of what transpired. Being adamant about opposing the death penalty was not helpful for the left to help the Democrats become a majority party again. Clinton, got us over that. Welfare reform, which I still don't like, and I talked about the past show, it worked better than I thought it would have, but there's still some pretty big flaws in it that still need to be corrected. It was necessary for Clinton to take the stance that he took to be taken seriously as a national candidate in 1992, and the left essentially let him do that despite some grinding of teeth. Going through that process didn't prevent Democrats from eventually getting a more liberal president, Barack Obama, once they got past the threshold of credibility and acceptability to the broad middle of the country.
Right.
So it's a little counterintuitive. There's some cognitive dissonance in all of that, but I do think that trajectory is one that Republicans are probably going to have to take. They're going to have to suck it up on something before they will get a fair hearing on their broader conservative view in the future.
But what's the incentive to go along with that? Because I think that we have this sort of game theory thing happening where there's like the tragedy of the commons, where collectively it might be in the Republican Party's best interest to do X as a brand. But individually, it is in the best interest of talk radio show hosts, of conservative pundits and columnists, and of members of Congress who represent certain districts to go public and air dirty laundry and say things that may be unhelpful. So in a sense, there's a certain selfishness that I think, some of that's always been true. I mean, I suspect the left had to deal with that, but I do think that technology has evolved to a point with the 24-hour cable news and Twitter and blogs where anybody who wants to get attention has an incentive to sort of, mess up the rebranding effort, and there's an audience out there hungry for that. How do you get past that?
Well, I mean, there's a degree of it, but in the 80s, the left didn't have a Rush Limbaugh. There was no liberal talk radio infrastructure. There was no massive media infrastructure putting a lot of, whipping up the base and putting pressure on the establishment to adhere to certain positions. They had special interest groups that played some of that role, but it never. I don't think they proved to be as strong. I mean, they were pretty strong in the mid '80s. Gary Hart tried to put up against that.
But it sounds like what you're saying is that it's going to be tougher for Republicans because when the Democrats had to do this, they could maybe get a little bit more people in a smoke-filled room. And, get some of the leaders on board to say, hey, you may not like this, but just go along with it. If we're ever going to win, we need to do this. But now you have people, it's a free agent nation. We're all independent brokers, and we all have our own incentives. We need page views. We need to to be mentioned in Mediaite or something. So it's in our incentive to be controversial, and if you're a member of Congress, it may be in your incentive to stand up to your leadership. That may be the smart move for you. How do you overcome that?
I mean, it's certainly different, and it may prove to be harder. I'm not based this on a whole lot of data, but I feel like you got to lose 3 times. After the third time, it's pretty clear something's wrong, and something's got to change. It's very hard making excuses at that point. And so I wouldn't think there's going to be a whole lot of differences between now and 2016. But we are seeing the rumblings of it now. Even in Rush Limbaugh Nation, you have SC Cup, you have Marco Rubio pushing on immigration. You have folks who are saying, let the gays into CPAC. I mean, they're in 2 years ago, for Pete's sake. They got banned the last 2 years. They were in 3 years ago. So those building blocks are there to eventually say, we're not the problem. You and in the Tea Party old guard, are the problem. And maybe it requires one more loss for that to become a critical mass. But then again, immigration reform might well happen this year, and so that actually might prove a more rapid recalibration than what the left had to deal with, in the 80s, and that might make it a harder thing to do a fair parallel. So I think it's a hard thing to game out. I do see. I think you're in that process. Clearly, CPAC is not, leading the bandwagon of conservative change right now. They're going to be the bulwark of trying to keep things as they are and wait for their day to come in the future. But you do see some prominent voices who are saying, look, we need to do the soul search. We can change in certain areas without abandoning core conservative principles. I expect it's going to play out in the Republican primary in 2016, particularly if Christie and Rubio and Rand Paul picking up different polls. And even in those discussions, the Tea Party is usually lost at the presidential level. They usually don't get to dictate the nominee. So whether it is another McCain-Romney-style pick for the Tea Party to say it's not our fault, it's your fault again, or if it goes to Rand Paul so they can really go down to blaze of glory like Barry Goldwater, I don't know yet. But there's all sorts of ways this could play out.
Indeed. Well, probably a good place to stop, Bill.
And on a good rambling, incoherent note, yes.
No, I think makes a lot of sense. Good stuff, man. Always good talking with you.
I'm sad I won't see you at CPAC. I feel this will be the best CPAC.
Are you coming to CPAC?
I'm not coming. Okay. I would like to be there. I'd love to pay the ticket and bring the family.
Meet Chris Hayes, great conservatives.
You guys are really going to hash it out this year, so I feel like it's going to be a lot of fun.
It could be interesting to watch. I will try to avoid it as much as possible. I'll be watching on TV. So
you're not going to go?
I have no plans. It's in Maryland, as you know.
Right.
And you can't metro there. You can't just drop by CPAC. But it's going to be interesting. It certainly will be, and I hope that it is more cathartic than divisive.
All right, well, till next week.
All right, man. See you next time on the DMZ.
Take care.